That morning, I wasn't supposed to pass by the bus stop. Instead of taking my usual route, I instinctively decided to walk down a different street. Maybe it was because the cafe I stopped by for coffee was closed, so I turned in another direction. The sky was gray, a gloomy but warm morning. There was a man curled up on the bench at the corner bus stop, an old, worn-out coat, a torn sleeping bag underneath him. His face was covered with a beard, his hair tangled, his shoes muddy. I couldn't see his face clearly, and yet somehow I couldn't take my eyes off him. I don't know why, but I couldn't walk past him. The feeling of not being able to pass by. It was strange. I slowed down. No bus was coming. Everything was silent. In that moment, the man slightly turned his head, and I saw his face. I froze. My heart started racing. My palms were sweating. My eyes locked onto a single point. That face, the one we'd only seen in old photos for years, the one we avoided looking at during every funeral, it belonged to my brother Matthew, or to someone who looked a lot like him. But the resemblance wasn't ordinary. Those eyes, that gaze, that scar, even the small mark on his forehead from when he fell off the roof as a child, it was all there. I leaned in toward his face. "Excuse me," I said. "Are you okay?" He opened his eyes. He looked at me with a glassy, vacant stare. He didn't recognize me, or he pretended not to. He simply turned his head to the side. "Please don't bother me," he whispered. In that moment, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to find out who this man was, sitting on a bench, his face carved by the years. But I was also scared. My own voice sounded foreign to me. I pulled out my phone and secretly took a photo. Without taking my eyes off him, I began to walk. My steps grew heavier. I felt a hollow ache in my stomach, sweat on my face. That morning, I wasn't supposed to walk past that stop, but I did. And in that moment, for the second time in my life, I began to lose my brother. The image of the man sleeping on the ground didn't leave my mind. All day at work, even as I stared at my computer screen, my thoughts kept circling back to the face I saw at that bus stop. Even coffee didn't help me shake it off. I put on my headphones and tried music. It didn't work. At one point, I went to the restroom and looked in the mirror. There were dark circles under my eyes. One question kept echoing in my head. Was it really him? On the way home, I missed the bus. Maybe on purpose, maybe not. I started walking down the same street where the stop was. My heart felt like a heavy stone in my chest. As I got closer to the stop, I had a strange sense of anticipation. It was crazy to think he'd still be there, but part of me was hoping maybe he's still sleeping there. Maybe this time he'll get up and talk. When I reached the stop, the bench was empty. Only a few scraps of newspaper, a plastic bag, and the old piece of cardboard he'd been sitting on were left behind. But he was gone. I felt something collapse inside me. Like a thread I was supposed to catch had snapped. My steps slowed down involuntarily. Just as I was about to turn back, a crumpled piece of paper on the ground caught my eye. I bent down and picked it up. Only one word was legible on it. Matt. My breath caught. Matthew, my brother's name. My hands started to tremble. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was another Matt. But something inside me screamed, no, this is not a coincidence. When I got home, my mother was in the kitchen making soup. I didn't say a word to her. But in my room, I looked at the photo again. I zoomed in on his face, enlarged it. That scar, the bridge of the nose, the slight droop of his eyelid. Could someone look this much alike? Or be this much the same? That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned for hours. I had to do something. Maybe I should go to the police, maybe call a shelter. But there was something more inside me. I had to go find him, because the man lying on the ground was gone, but the face he left behind was now etched into my being. And if he really was my brother, this time I wouldn't just stand there and watch him disappear. This time I would find him. The scar in the photo matched the wound in my memory exactly. Just above his left eyebrow, the one he got as a child when he fell, the same one we later learned had deepened during the war. That scar was how we all remembered him. A quiet mark he carried, as if to say he had survived everything, but something inside him had remained broken. At midnight, I got out of bed with my phone in hand. Sleeping was impossible. I went online, looked up homeless shelters, made a list of local outreach organizations. I was determined to head out before morning. I made a plan: shelters near the bus stop, soup kitchens, places where someone might have seen him. Maybe someone knew him. Maybe someone had seen a trace. In the morning, I told my mother after breakfast that I needed to go out. She didn't ask where I was going. She looked into my eyes for a long moment, and then she said only one thing: "If you find him, don't let go this time." My first stop was a shelter near the city center. An elderly volunteer answered the door. A few people inside were having breakfast. I showed her the photo. "Has this man been here?" I asked. The woman looked closely, then slowly shook her head. "The face looks familiar, but I'm not sure," she said. "There was a short man here last night. He kept mumbling something. Kept saying, 'Yellow bus, yellow bus, yellow bus?'" I repeated, my skin covered in goosebumps. The woman shrugged. "We didn't know what he meant." Then he left. Yellow bus. Wasn't that the color of the school bus Matthew used to drive before he was drafted? Suddenly, old images lit up in my mind. My brother stepping off that bus in his uniform. The yellow bus was his last goodbye to us. So he was still there. In his mind, time had frozen. He had stayed in that moment. Right then, I made up my mind. I would go to the back street near that old school. Maybe I'd find a trace, a footprint, or maybe him. Because now I knew. This wasn't just a search. This was a battle to bring a memory back to life. And this time, I wouldn't give up. The words "yellow bus" led us to the last place he was seen. The back street of the school where my brother Matthew had worked before going off to war. A place we had visited countless times years ago, then completely forgotten. My mother and I jumped in the car and drove straight there. Neither of us spoke during the drive. An old country song played on the radio, but no one heard it. The school building was still standing. The paint on the garden fences was peeling. The school sign bent from the wind. There were no children's voices anymore. Just an old building and an old silence. But maybe it still carried a trace. Maybe the ghost of that yellow bus was still here, like Matthew's memory. We turned into the back street. The concrete sidewalks were cracked. Trash bins toppled along the road. But he was there, sitting against the wall, head bowed, wrapped in a blanket. I couldn't be sure. I hit the brakes. My mother held her breath for a moment. "Is it him?" she whispered. I got out. My legs were trembling. With every step, the possibility inside me grew. What if it was him? What if it wasn't? I walked closer. I paused before touching his shoulder. His breathing was steady. He was asleep, his face hidden from the sun, but his hairline, his hands, everything was familiar. "Matthew," I said. His eyes slowly opened. His pupils seemed like momentary darkness, then flickered. His gaze met mine. There was fear in them, an exhaustion, and a familiar sorrow. But most of all, there was recognition, remembrance. "You," he said. I could barely hear his voice. "Am I dreaming?" I clenched my jaw to keep from crying. I shook my head. "No," I said, "this is real." We heard the car door close behind us. My mother had gotten out and was walking toward us. Matthew looked at her. His eyes widened. His lips moved, but no words came out. He simply reached out his hand, and it hovered in the air. My mother knelt, took his hand. "Matthew is," she said, "my son." And in that moment, the world stood still. After 29 years, a mother held her child's hand again, silently, without tears, just by being there. That day, on the edge of a broken sidewalk, we didn't just find a man from the past. We found a heart that had returned to where it belonged. And that heart was still beating. The fragility in his eyes was deeper than the day he disappeared. That morning, when Matthew woke up, he didn't look at us. He looked at the skumay, as if he still wasn't sure he was alive. My mother stayed by his side through the night, wiping his forehead like she did when he was sick as a child. But he wasn't a child anymore. The things he had been through had turned him into a quiet man from the inside out. Years ago, Matthew never returned from duty. But now he was coming back from somewhere much farther away. The day he disappeared, he left behind only a bag and a few words spoken without goodbyes. Those words still echo in my ears. Don't worry about me, it won't be long. But nothing short ever lasted as long as 29 years. That morning, there was silence at the breakfast table. No clinking forks, no stirring of tea, only the sound of our breathing. Matthew kept his eyes on his plate. He wasn't eating, just staring. At one point, he lifted his head, looked at me, then at our mother. Then his gaze drifted off. I stayed there, he said. Truly, I stayed there. My body may have come back, but my mind is still at the border outpost. My mother didn't respond. She hid her hands under the table and tried not to cry and whine. My father wasn't at the table, a man who had mourned his son for so many years. Maybe he wasn't ready to face him just yet. And I understood that, because that morning the same truth was written in everyone's eyes. This house no longer held a secret. Everything was out in the open. I was sitting across from Matthew. Nothing I could say would be enough. Anything I asked would be too much. So I simply asked, "Where have you been?" He smiled, a painful smile. "When they found me and asked for my ID, I couldn't remember my name," he said. "I stayed silent for 3 days. Then someone called me Caleb, and it stuck. They took me to an orphanage, then a job, then another place, but I was always temporary. I never felt like I belonged anywhere. Eventually, I just disappeared." There was silence, but it wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was filled with years, years that couldn't be reclaimed, broken dreams, and most of all, moments he could never feel he belonged in. After a while, Matthew lowered his head. "But being here, even if everything's broken and old, it feels right," he said. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "If your heart is broken," she said, "we're here. We'll fix it together." And that morning I understood. Some wounds are not earned in battle. They are lost. But family can hear those losses even in silence and bring everything back together again. When my father saw him, he didn't get up, but his eyes said everything. A day after Matthew returned, we noticed Dad had sat in his old chair on the porch for hours without moving. His eyes weren't looking at the garden. They were fixed on a much older time. He clasped his hands on his knees, using silence as a kind of shield. My mother wanted to call him inside, but Matthew motioned with his hand. "Let me approach him," he said. He stepped slowly onto the porch. The soles of his shoes creaked against the wooden floorboards. My father didn't lift his gaze. He didn't speak, didn't greet him. But something warm passed over his face, like pain. Recognition happened without a single word. Matthew sat in the empty chair across from him. For a long time, neither of them said anything, but a conversation had begun between them, because sometimes words are heavy, and it's the glances that carry the weight. Eventually, my father slowly turned his eyes toward Matthew. His lips parted, but no sound came at first. Then he whispered just one word, "Son." Matthew's chin quivered. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry." My father shook his head. "No," he said, "that apology isn't yours. That day, I trusted you and turned my back. I thought you'd come back. But you got lost, and I buried you, not at a gravesite, but inside me." Then Matthew reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper and handed it over. My father looked at it. It was a handwritten note. The author unknown, but at the bottom, instead of a signature, there was only a single letter. J. "This," Matthew said, "was the note the first person who found me gave me. It didn't mean anything at the time. But now I understand. It was telling me I had to find you. I was just waiting for the right time." My father took the note. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry. Sometimes men don't cry, not because they're strong, but because what they feel is too vast for tears. "For as long as you were gone," my father said, "I stayed silent. Sitting here now, face to face, it's bigger than words." And in that moment, someone finally sat in a chair that had remained empty for years. The silence continued. But now, that silence wasn't shame. It was a shared past. And in that moment, I understood. Sometimes a father forgives his son, not with words, but simply by being there. He didn't tell us everything, but he let us sit beside him. And through silence, he told us enough. The next morning, as sunlight slipped through the curtains, a soft silence filled the house. Matthew hadn't come down for breakfast. My father stood at the porch door, staring outside for a long time, and my mother forgot the kettle boiling on the stove. No one was in a rush. We were waiting, because some things need to happen in their own time. When the door gently opened, Matthew stepped inside from the yard. He carried an old backpack and wore a worn-out coat from years ago. He didn't say anything. He just looked at us and gave a nod, as if to say, "Come with me." My mother, father, and I followed him quietly. There were no questions, no answers. We left the house, walked through the back streets, and made our way to the old railway line. It hadn't been used in years, but the tracks were still there. Each step felt like it was lifting an old memory from the ground. At one point, Matthew stopped. He crouched by the tracks and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small stone, smooth, black, and just the size of a palm. He placed it on the rail. Then he opened his backpack and took out a yellowed notebook. He didn't flip through the pages, just opened the cover. There were no names, no dates, but there were words, hundreds of lines, clearly written in the silence of countless nights. He didn't hand the notebook to us. He only said, "These are the things I can't say." In that moment, no words were needed. We sat with him, all of us, by the side of the tracks. Birds flew overhead. In the distance, a child rode a bicycle. It was an ordinary day, but for us, time had stopped. Each of us read silently from within. Matthew's past, the missing years, the fears, the hopes, and the regrets. He hadn't shared any details about where he'd been, but by letting us sit beside him, he had built a quiet bridge. He had spoken without speaking. And in that moment, I understood. Some people don't tell their stories with words. Sometimes walking beside someone is the quietest, truest way to carry the weight of years. A few days had passed since Matthew returned, but the house was still echoing with the past. He remained quiet. He didn't speak, he only listened. Sometimes he went out to the yard, sat in the dirt, picked up a stick, and fidgeted with it for hours. Everyone in the house was waiting not just for his body to return, but for his spirit. And that spirit still seemed to be on the road. It was midday when my sister Sarah arrived, driving in from the farm just outside town. She had left the kids with their grandmother and came alone. When she stepped out of her car, her face carried both hope and fear. I opened the door. I didn't even have to say, "He's here." She knew. She walked straight to the living room without taking off her shoes. Matthew was sitting by the window, his eyes fixed on the tree swaying in the wind outside. When Sarah entered, she paused, just for a few seconds. But those seconds held a lifetime. Hearing her footsteps, Matthew turned his head. When their eyes met, he didn't say anything, but his breath hitched, so deeply, so clearly, it said more than any words could. Sarah took a few steps, then stopped. Her lips trembled, and she barely managed to whisper, "I thought I had already said goodbye to you." All eyes were on her face, but she didn't meet anyone's gaze. She couldn't, because inside her, a long-suppressed guilt was rising to the surface. Matthew stood. His steps were slow but steady. He walked over to Sarah. His hands were clenched in his coat pockets. "I thought you'd forgotten me," he said, "but I never forgot you. I just had no one to talk to." Tears ran down Sarah's cheeks. "I visited your grave," she said. "I brought the kids. I thought that's where you were." Matthew lowered his head. Maybe a part of me really was. Silence settled again. But this time it wasn't distance between them. It was a connection. The lost years found a path back through the tears, and we understood that day. A true goodbye doesn't always come with words. Sometimes all it takes is a single embrace, one that lifts the weight of years from your shoulders in an instant. That night, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't the kind of silence we were used to. Even though no one spoke much, it felt like we were all sharing the same emotion. No one raised their voice in the living room. No one brought up the past directly, but our posture, our glances, our breath, they all said the same thing. Matthew is here, and we still don't know what to feel. After hugging her brother, Sarah sat in the chair by the window, her eyes still wet. My father walked around the room with a cup of tea in his hand, but didn't sit down. Even my mother, as she added wood to the stove, moved in rhythm with the quiet. I stood in the corner, not looking at anyone, but watching everyone. Matthew sat on the large couch in the living room, and for the first time, despite the space between us, we felt that he was truly here. A faint smile played on his lips. His hands rested on his knees, his head tilted slightly forward, as if he was looking inward. At one point, my father stopped walking and approached him. "Want to go for a walk after dinner?" he asked. There was so much in that simple sentence, all the unspoken apologies of the past, the foundation of old wounds, and the quiet offer of a new beginning. Matthew nodded. "Okay," he said simply. My mother began setting the table. Everything looked as it always had, but that night one chair was filled for the first time in years, and the person sitting in it wasn't just a lost brother. He was a missing part of all of us. After dinner, we really did go for a walk. My father and Matthew walked ahead. Sarah and I followed a little behind. The conversation was sparse and slow, but every word, every step brought us a little closer together in the freezing night. The stars were clear that night, the sky spotless, and as we walked, it felt like we weren't just crushing the snow beneath our feet. We were breaking through years of frozen emotions that had built up inside us. By the time we returned home, something had changed. Because sometimes, everything doesn't begin with someone coming back. Sometimes it begins with a few quiet steps taken beside them. And we realize sometimes a lost person isn't just found, they are welcomed back. That morning, the house felt different. The air was still cold, but the crackling from the stove sounded softer. There was a kind of calm in the rooms that we couldn't quite explain, as if a lingering sense of waiting, of absence, of suffocation that had hung in the house for years had finally given way to peace. Everyone was awake, but no one was in a hurry. The breakfast table wasn't set in haste. It was set with care. As my mother toasted the bread, there was a faint smile on her face. My father laid out his newspaper on the table. He wasn't reading it, but he was there. Sarah walked into the kitchen and started helping. Even she seemed calmer, and I just walked through the house, looked into every corner. We had lived many mornings in this home before, but this morning was different, because that chair was no longer empty, and the table, once used to being incomplete, was finally whole. When Matthew walked into the living room, no one stopped to look at him, because now he was simply part of the house. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair a bit messy, but there was a calmness on his face, as if, for the first time, he had truly slept, as if he had finally looked at a roof and called it home. He sat down and picked up a glass of tea. On his first sip, his eyes met ours with a quiet smile. "The tea's still the same," he said. "You haven't changed." My mother smiled. "Neither have you," she said. "You just got here a little late." Breakfast lasted longer than usual that morning. No one was rushing anywhere. Everyone shared stories. My father recalled a summer vacation from years ago. Sarah talked about how Matthew used to read books to her when they were kids. And me, I just listened. Every word felt like a fresh coat of paint on the walls of this house. Everything old was coming back to life. When Matthew finished his last bite, he lifted his head. "I don't want to leave anymore," he said. "I know I still have things to talk about. But first, I just wanted to be here for a while." My father nodded. "We'll wait for whatever you have to say, because now you've got time." And at that moment, a sentence passed quietly through my mind. I didn't say it out loud, but I'll always remember it. We spent years waiting for him to come back, but maybe he was the one waiting to see if there was still a place to come back to. And that day, we understood. Someone lost in war doesn't just leave the battlefield behind. They leave parts of themselves behind too. But if there's still a place to return to, then maybe that war is finally over.